should be able to see and hear us. Welcome. I'm Mathieu Calu. I'm president of the North Sea Vlieg Club, who organizes this webinar. Let me introduce you to the North Sea Vlieg Club briefly. We are a flying club and dedicated training organization at Ostend International Airport at the Belgian coast. For pilots, we offer a modern fleet of 4 aircrafts, and for those who want to become pilots, we have a very good PPL course. Both groups can benefit from an airport with all the facilities an international airport has to offer, such as 24/7 opening hours and professional ATC. But everyone with a passion for aviation is welcome as a supporting member or during the weekends at our terrace with a stunning view on the runway. You can find more information on our website, nzpc.be, or on our social media. But enough about the North Sea Vlieg Club. It's high time I introduce you our speaker of tonight, Kerry McCauley. You may have seen him already on Discovery Channel, but today he is with us to talk about getting small single-engine aircraft over the ocean. It's with great pleasure I give the floor to Kerry.
All right, well, thanks everyone. Thanks for having me here this evening. My name, like you said, I'm Kerry McCauley. I'm here to talk to you about my career as an international ferry pilot, delivering small planes all over the world. Basically, we'll start off with the definition. What's a ferry pilot? That's someone who flies other people's planes around to wherever they need them flown to. I particularly specialize in international ferry flying. And that basically means if someone's got a small plane that needs to be flown over a big ocean and they're not stupid enough to do it themselves, I'm the guy they give a call to. So I got my start in ferry flying in 1990, working for a company called Orient Air out of St. Paul, Minnesota, kind of by Chicago area. And I had about 1,000 hours of flight time at that point in my career and got hired with this company. It was a friend of mine whose father owned it. And I'd been working toward that for 3 years to get to that point because he told me about ferry flying and flying small planes over Africa and stuff. And it sounded like just the most amazing adventure in the world. And I really wanted to be one. So I finally had enough time and got hired. And I figured they'd start me off slow, you know, maybe if some ferry flights around the United States, maybe into Canada, down to Mexico. But that wasn't going to be the case. I got a call the week later and said, do you want to ferry a Beach Duchess from St. Paul to Lisbon, Portugal? And that was kind of surprising. Like, okay, right off the deep end to start with. Cool. And then I got the next surprise. I was going to be alone in the plane on my very first trip. That was kind of exciting as well because figured I'd have somebody with me on the first one, but nope, all by myself. Well, sort of by myself. My boss was going to be coming with me, and my boss, Pete Demas, but he was going to be in a different plane. He was going to be in a Cessna 206 flying to Zurich, but I'd be alone in the plane. He was just going to be in the same airspace with me. So our route on that first trip was St. Paul to Bangor, Maine on the east coast of the United States. That's where we cleared customs. And from there, we went to St. John's, Newfoundland. It's an island on the east coast of Canada, easternmost point of Canada. And the next leg was going to be 1,700 miles of open ocean to Santa Maria in the Azores. The Azores is a cluster of islands off the coast of Portugal. And let me tell you, the first time you take off from St. John's and look over your shoulder and watch the shoreline disappear behind you, and then you'd look all the way around and there's nothing to see but open ocean, that's kind of a gut check. That's realizing that you're really doing this. Now, it wasn't quite as crazy as you think because I'd been, you know, thoroughly trained by Orient Air. I went through their ferry pilot training program, which consisted of sitting in my boss's office for 2 hours, drinking scotch with him and listening to him tell me about all the different ways you could get killed over the North Atlantic. So I was highly trained. His speech was very inspiring. But I needn't have worried. That first trip was a piece of cake. The airplane was a Beach Duchess, like I mentioned. It's a light twin, 4-passenger. Plane was a beautiful airplane. The engines ran smooth. The weather was perfect. Sunny skies, no clouds, just absolutely smooth as silk. And I just sat back and listened to my music and read a book and realized that all my fears about ferry flying were completely unfounded and it was the easiest job in the world. And that feeling lasted right up to the midway point. And then we had a problem. And it wasn't me that had the problem, it was my boss. He called me and said he'd lost his vacuum pump. Vacuum pump's the instrument or the pump that runs all your flight instruments. And he was a little concerned about that because he's kind of an old guy back then, kind of like I am now. And he hadn't practiced his partial panel stuff at all. He was not current on needle ball airspeed. And he was really worried about that because the second half of our trip wasn't going to be sunny, clear skies. It was forecast to be low clouds, heavy wind, heavy rain, and at night because this was late December. So he was a little concerned about having to fly 700 miles with a partial panel, no artificial horizon. So his big idea was he was going to circle in place. He'd taken off 15 minutes before me and wait for me to catch up, which we did. He caught up to me. And then his plan was he was going to fly night IFR formation with me all the way to Santa Maria. Like, okay, why not? I mean, we didn't practice it, but what the heck, why give it a shot? And so that's what we did. He formed up on me and we dove into the clouds. And I really have to thank him for doing that with me that night because it really took my mind off the danger of flying over open ocean at night in bad weather because I wasn't scared of that at all. Because what I was scared of was my boss flying formation on my wing because I would look over my shoulder and see his position lights bobbing and weaving all over the place and forward and backwards. He wasn't very good at formation flying, and I was terrified the whole evening that he was going to hit me. So wasn't scared of the ferry flight at all at that point. But somehow we managed to find Santa Maria and get it on the ground, and everything would turn out good. And that was the first leg in a 30-year ferry flying career for me. And it pretty much set the tone for my entire career because I've had just a huge laundry list of things go wrong with me ferry flying. So it's a lot of things that people ask me about ferry flying is, number one, how do you get small planes over the ocean? Obviously a small Cessna or Piper isn't designed to fly 1,700 miles to the Azores or 2,000 miles to Ireland or even up to through Greenland and Iceland. So the biggest challenge that we have is, number one, obviously the fuel. Most of these planes don't have the range to make it to these distances. So what we do is we install ferry tanks in the plane. We take the seats out of the plane, put it in the back, and put big metal ferry tanks inside the plane and plumb it into the fuel system. And that gives us the range to cover the long distances you need to, fly over the ocean. After that, we put in a HF radio. It's a high frequency radio, kind of like a ham radio. And that allows us to talk to Gander Oceanic Control or Shannon when we're 1,000 miles out of the ocean, because obviously your VHF radio won't cover that distance. After that, you throw in a big bag of snacks and 160 pounds of stupid pilot, and there you are. You're all set to fly over the ocean. Nothing could be simpler. I really like the challenge of it. Ferry flying has a lot of unique challenges that are different than almost any kind of flying in the world, basically. First thing we have is we almost never get checked out in the planes that we fly. If someone's hired me to fly an airplane, ferried overseas, most of the time it's a used airplane. And that means the seller has already got his money and he doesn't want to come anywhere near that plane because whatever happens, if something goes bad with the plane or a test flight, he's got to give the money back. So he doesn't want to come with anywhere near it. He just tosses me the keys and say, good luck. And that's even if it's a plane that not only have I never flown before, but possibly never even heard of before. So I just show up, gig out the pilot's operating handbook, read a couple of pages here and there, make sure there's nothing unique about the airplane, then turn to the page titled How to Start the Engine, get the plane going, take off, and figure it en route. That's actually one of the funnest things I like about ferry flying because I love the challenge and the uniqueness of just hopping in a strange airplane and taking off and going figuring it out on the way. And most planes are relatively the same. If you get them going fast enough, they usually fly. Other challenges that we have on ferry flying are obviously navigation. Like I said, my ferry flight started in 1990, and that was back before we had GPS. So my first 8 trips over the Atlantic were exactly like Charles Lindbergh's. I had nothing but a compass. So what we do is at Canada, they'll give us a weather briefing, give a weather packet, and a winds and law forecast for the entire North Atlantic. And we would sit down with our good old-fashioned paper map and the E6B flight calculator, plot out our great circle route, and then plot out each position with the winds and law forecast. And that's how we cross the North Atlantic. And it's kind of unique because as soon as you leave range of the last VOR in Canada, you really have no way of knowing if the winds and law forecast was accurate or not, because there's nothing to cross-reference your flight on. So if you run into unforecast headwinds or crosswinds, you won't know you're in trouble until it's way too late. Now, luckily, the Canadians are really good at weather forecasting and winds aloft forecasting, but I do know a couple of guys that ran into unforecast headwinds and barely made it. And I knew a couple of guys that ran into unforecast headwinds and didn't make it. So it was always something that was definitely on our mind. You know, the main difference in ferry flying of most other flying is when you're flying over parts of the world that don't have diverts, there's no airports to divert to. Once you cross the point of no return, you're stuck. You pretty much have to complete the mission. And the point of no return, we also call the equal time point, is the point on your trip that once you cross that line, you don't have enough fuel to go back and return to your point of origin. So once you cross that line, whatever happens after that, you have to deal with. There's no time out. There's no land and figure it out. So when you cross that line in the Atlantic Ocean, if you run into bad weather, just going to have to deal with it. If you get icing, change altitudes, do whatever you can. Sometimes I've been forced down to 50 feet over the water to get beneath the freezing level to try to melt off any ice. If you get a line of thunderstorms, you got to pick your way through or whatever else. Excuse me. Also, if you have maintenance problems with the airplane, you know, if you get a problem with an engine or part of the airplane, you're just going to have to deal with it and keep it going, because the alternative is ditching, and definitely don't want to ditch in the ocean. And ditching is definitely probably one of our biggest concerns, because that's where most ferry pilots get killed. You know, most people ask me, is it really that dangerous? And yeah, it really is. Back in the 90s, when I started, we lost an average of 3 pilots a year over the North Atlantic, and that's lost, and they didn't make it home. So I'm always pretty concerned with ditching and surviving a ditching situation. So what I do to survive ditching situations, I always wear a survival suit. It's a 1/4-inch neoprene suit that zips up and the only thing that exposes your face. You also have to have a raft, because even if you get out of the plane in your survival suit, which keeps you alive for a little while, you're going to be out in the water for quite a long time, and you better be in your raft, because otherwise you're just not going to survive. The survival suit will protect you from the cold water for a while, but not for the time it takes for someone to get you. Because once you're more than a couple hours off the coast, you're out of range of any aircraft. You know, helicopters can't make it more than 100 miles off coast to come and rescue you. And that means you're going to be relying on a ship to come and get you. And ships are slow, so you're probably going to be in the water for a long time. Just this last December, a brand new Pilatus Porter went down halfway between Hawaii and California, and that crew was in the raft for, I think, 22 hours. So definitely something to be concerned about. And the other problem that we have is, you know, once you're in your raft, you know, how do they find you? I always carry an EPIRB. It's a satellite rescue beacon. Back in the 90s, I actually carried an actual ELT, an old ELT out of an airplane. Never really was too optimistic about that working, but it was better than nothing. And we carry a handheld radio, signaling device. I used to carry a flare gun, but we can't use those anymore because I can't bring them back on the airlines when I'm on the way home. So now I use a laser pointer. Carry a handheld GPS. So if I do get in contact with somebody on the radio, I can tell them exactly where I am. A couple extra space blankets to keep you warm in the raft. Maybe some water, a little bit of some candy bars or some food to help keep you warm. And that's pretty much it. Because you can't really count on getting out of the plane with much of anything. Anything I really want to have with me, I have zipped inside my survival suit. Because I assume that once I hit the water, that plane's going to flip upside down and start sinking immediately. That's my assumption anyway. So I figure anything I really want to have with me, I have in my survival suit. And then I just have to get my raft and get out of the plane with that. Now, so far, I haven't gone down yet, but I do know I've met a couple people that have ditched, and one guy was able to just step right onto the wing and didn't even get wet. Another person had to climb out of a sinking airplane. So I'm always prepared for the worst. The other thing that I do is I carry a survival kit for wherever I might go down other places in the world. Because if you're traveling from one side of the planet to the other, you've got a lot of hostile terrain that you might have to land in or crash in and survive for a couple days. And so what I do is I look at the trip that I've got and I customize my survival suit or my survival kit for that trip. Like if I'm flying from the United States to Africa, I'll start off, I have to fly over northern Canada, so I better be able to survive in the northern Canadian forest. Then if I take the northern route up through Greenland and Iceland, I have to have my ocean survival gear. Then if I'm crossing the Canadian ice cap or the Greenland ice cap, I have to have my Arctic survival gear. Then down through Europe into Africa, if I'm going to fly over the Sahara, I need my desert survival gear. And then over Central Africa, I need my jungle survival gear. So my survival kit's changing for whatever trip I'm in. Because, and that I focus on that quite a bit because I always assume any plane I get in is going to try to kill me. I mean, these planes are almost always used airplanes. I'd say about 80% are used airplanes, and their maintenance is questionable. Basically, they're all planes that are being sold. And why is a plane being sold? Because it's sitting there and the pilot, the owner's not using it much, and his wife makes him sell it. So he might not have flown it for a year, and then maybe it takes a year or so to sell it. So by the time I show up, that plane might have sat for 2, 3, up to 10 years. Now they all have a current maintenance inspection, but they can't find everything. And as you know, the worst thing in the world for a plane is to have it sit there for a number of years and not fly. So when I show up, I give it the best look over I can, best pre-flight, cut apart the oil filter to make sure it's not making metal, and then take off and hope for the best. And I've had a lot of stuff happen to me with these planes. I've had to change alternators, vacuum pumps, tires, windshield. I was in Greenland one time and blew a valve cover gasket. And it was going to take over 2 weeks to get a new gasket. So I had to make a valve cover gasket out of cardboard. I basically took the old gasket that had broke apart, traced it out on the cardboard and cut it apart with the scissors and made that. And it lasted long enough to get me to Iceland. So sometimes you have to be pretty self-reliant to ferry used airplanes around the world. And then there's the other main challenge in ferry flying, and that's fatigue. A lot of these trips, a trip to Europe usually takes me about a week, and that's on the shorter end of ferry flying. Africa, Middle East, and the South Pacific, that could take up to 2 or 3 weeks. And these are long days, and they're really long days because we're always by ourselves. The main goal in ferry flying is to get the plane moved as economically and cheaply as possible for the customer. And that means single pilot. We don't have enough money, to pay another pilot, to put them up in hotels, feed them, have all the fees associated with it. So I'm almost always flying by myself. And that means long days of just you. Our typical day is I'll get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, get out to the airport, try to get off the ground before sunup, fly all day, which an easy day is 8 hours of flying, can be up to 15 hours, and get to the ground. By the time you land, especially if you're going eastbound, you've gone through multiple time zones, so it can be late at night. Get the plane fueled for the next day, go through customs, pay landing fees, all that stuff. Try to get to the hotel, find a place to sleep. There's usually nothing open, no restaurants, so you're eating out of your snack bag. And then try to get some sleep for the next day. And good luck getting some sleep in the hotel. Usually by the time I get to the hotel, I'm still jazzed from a whole day of flying. My adrenaline's still going. My ears are still ringing. I'm still tingling from 10 hours in an airplane. And then I can't, stop thinking about the next day's challenge. I mean, the next day I might be flying over the ocean or the desert or the jungle. Either way, no matter what, it's going to be a challenging day of flying. So it can be very difficult to get to sleep that night in the hotel. Now, luckily, it's super easy to get to sleep the next day in the airplane. Very easy to fall asleep in the plane, which is one of the big challenges, not sleeping in the plane. I do a lot of things in the plane to stay awake. I do exercises in the airplane. If I can sit sideways, I'll do sit-ups, I do isometrics, keep the blood flowing, listen to a lot of music, sing along to the music, drum on the instrument panel, play a lot of air guitar. It helps to practice air guitar. I've gotten pretty good at it, actually. Kind of a whiz. Then I also drink a lot of diet sodas and coffee in the plane to help keep me awake. The caffeine really helps. Now, of course, if you're going to spend all day in a small airplane drinking coffee and diet soda, eventually science is going to take over and you're going to have to, use the facilities. And these small planes aren't like a 747. You can't walk in the bathroom, go to the bathroom. So you have to do something in the cockpit. Now, when I started, my boss always told me to bring along a small plastic jug or water bottle and pee into that. But I never cared for that very much because I hated walking into an airport carrying a jug of something that's obviously not apple juice. So I developed the Ziploc baggie method. Basically, I bring along quart Ziploc baggies and urinate into that. And that way you're not uncomfortable all day. And it's nice, easy package. You're gonna always want to use 2 Ziploc baggies if you ever use that. You know, trust me on that one. But it's a nice package. You get rid of it, put it in your garbage bag, piece of cake. Or if you're lucky enough to be in an airplane where the window opens up, you can just open the window and check it out. And all done. Super. Now, of course, when I'm flying over the ocean, I would save my pee bags for targets of opportunity, you know, ships. See if you can hit them. Now, I don't think I ever actually hit a ship, but if I did, I'm really sorry. So other things I do in the plane is sometimes I catch small catnaps. You know, when you're out over the ocean, there's not much to hit. So if I have a plane that has a good autopilot, I used to have a small pilot's watch that had an alarm on it, and I would stick it inside my headset, set it for 5 minutes, and I catch little tiny naps. You'd be amazed what a little 5-minute nap will do. Helps a lot. But the other things you have is just the big emergencies I would run into, you know, and there were a lot of them. I had a lot of unique emergencies, in-flight emergencies over the years. I got struck by lightning in a 206 while flying over the Atlantic off the coast of Portugal. Burned a big chunk of the prop off, burned some holes in the plane, and scared the heck out of me. I have no idea how I didn't turn into a million pieces of aluminum confetti. I lost an engine in a Mooney with a ferry tank problem over at 19,000 feet while penetrating a line of thunderstorms. That was pretty exciting. Had to dead stick out of there. One night I was ferrying a 210 from Morocco down to the Ivory Coast over the bulge of the Sahara, and I lost my alternator. Now, when we fly that route over the bulge of Africa, we always fly it at night because when you get down toward the equator, every afternoon you're almost guaranteed thunderstorms down by the equator. So we would fly that route at night, and that way we would arrive in the morning when the weather's good. But that particular night, I'd lost my alternator 3 hours into it and had to fly the whole night by flashlight, and that was kind of challenging. That was pretty long night. The battery was completely dead, and cockpit was completely dark, and I had to have my flashlight just to retain control of the airplane. And when I got to my destination, no radios, no nothing, had to pump the landing gear down, and then almost got thrown in jail because of it, because the airport manager was kind of unhappy that I hadn't talked to anybody all night. But I think one of my biggest challenges had been I was ferrying a F33 Bonanza is a brand new plane from the factory in Wichita, Kansas, central U.S. to Paris, France. And I got to St. John's in Newfoundland. And just before I went to bed, left the airport. I got a weather briefing for the next morning. And I looked at the winds aloft, and there were super strong tailwinds straight across the Atlantic, basically pointed right from St. John's to Paris. And I did some calculations, realized if I left right then, I could make it to Paris that night in one go instead of having go down to the Azores the next day and then back up. And if I could do that, I would save the company quite a bit of money because I'd save them all the fuel going down to the Azores and back, save the landing fees in the Azores, save the hotel, pretty much save a whole day off the trip and save the company thousands of dollars. And as a ferry pilot, that's your job. If you can save the company money, that's what you're expected to do. Now, the fact that I was personally going to get a whole extra night of partying in France had nothing to do with it all with my decision to just go ahead and straight across. I was only thinking of the company, not myself at all. I swear to God. So that's what I did. Instead of going to the hotel, I just hopped right back in the plane, shot straight across to Paris. And about 4 hours into that flight, the wing tanks, I'd run the wing tanks pretty dry. I turned on the ferry tank to start moving some fuel from the ferry tanks out to the wing tanks. And the fuel wasn't moving. And that was a big problem because I was literally right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and only had maybe a half hour left of fuel in the wing tanks. And that wasn't nearly enough to get me back to Canada or to Paris or even to Ireland. I was pretty much stuck right in the center of the Atlantic Ocean, and I needed that gas. That was essentially my Apollo 11 moment. But I was even in a worse situation because I didn't have NASA to back me up. I had to figure this out on my own. And I was literally the most lonely person in the world that night because I was 500 miles from the nearest, well, more than that, from Ireland. There was nobody within 1,000 miles of me, really. So I sat there and looked at that tank and figured, how am I going to get this, fuel moved? A little background on the ferry tanks. The way the ferry tanks work is we've got the ferry tank in the cabin, and gravity alone will not let that fuel go out to the wing tanks because the wing tanks have a little bit of pressure in them. So we need to put air pressure and pressurize those tanks, and that's what forces the fuel out to the wing tanks. And to pressurize the tank, what we do is we have an air line that runs from the top of the tank, and we route it down through the belly, drill a hole in the belly or in an access panel in the belly, and then we mount a J tube that faces the direction of flight. And basically the ram air goes through that J tube up through the air line into the tank and pressurizes the tank. And something had gone wrong with that J tube, and I figured I knew what it was, because normally we mount that J tube real secure through a hole in the belly with a nut and a couple nuts and a washer. But this was a brand new airplane, and my boss didn't want to drill a hole in a brand new airplane. So we put that J tube through an access cover sideways and tightened it down, tightened the screws down as tight as he could, and then used about a half a roll of duct tape to hold it in place. Kind of a jury-rigged situation that him and the mechanic thought would work just fine. I wasn't really happy with it, but I deferred to their experience, and I tested it out from St. Paul to St. John's. It worked for 2 days, so I had no reason to think it wouldn't work. And that was kind of my big problem. That night, I should have tested it early before I was out of range of Canada, but I was young and invincible, as all 25-year-olds are. Nothing's ever bad's ever going to happen to you. I was cocky because I've been ferry flying for a couple of years, and I thought I was getting pretty good at it, and complacent. So young, cocky, complacent, all the things that you don't want to be if you want to have a good long career as a ferry pilot. And I'd really got myself into a jam. So I sat there and looked at that tank and figured, how can I get that pressure into that tank? And I looked at the hose. I figured, if I can blow up an air mattress, maybe I can blow up a ferry tank. So I unscrewed the line and put it in my mouth and just started blowing. And I blew for about 10 minutes or so until pressure built up, capped it off with some more duct tape. And sure enough, some fuel moved. Awesome. I figured out a solution. I'd moved a little bit of gas. Maybe I wasn't going to die that night. And I did some calculations and realized I'd only moved a couple of gallons of fuel. And then it's more calculations, figured I'm going to have to blow in that ferry tank literally all night. And that turned into definitely the longest night of my life. Because I neglected to tell you one minor thing. The winds aloft that were helping me go from St. John's to Paris were only at 15,000 feet and above. So I was at 15,000 feet blowing into this tank. And no, I didn't have any oxygen. So I was immediately super hypoxic. Now, typically when I'm ferry flying, I fly at high altitudes without oxygen quite a bit for a couple of reasons. Number one, I can't bring oxygen with me because you can't bring the bottles back with you on the airlines. Now, if the plane I'm ferrying has oxygen, sure, we'll fill up the tanks, but that's usually the exception, not the rule. But I always fly as high as I can for a couple of reasons. Number one, planes perform much better at higher altitudes. And usually if you're crossing the Atlantic, that's where the better winds aloft are. But the other reason is if you have a problem, an in-flight emergency, the higher you are, the longer you have to deal with that problem or to prepare for ditching or to holler for help or all three. If you're flying around at 2,000 feet and you lose an engine, you're in the water before you have a chance to holler for help, get your survival suit on or anything. You're just in the water immediately. So I'll typically fly at 15 to 18,000 feet. And I'm pretty good at high altitudes at that, maintaining, a good mental state at high altitudes, as long as I'm sitting still. If you have to move around a lot, that's when hypoxia will start setting in. But that night of sitting there and blowing into that ferry tank was definitely the exact opposite of sitting still. So I was immediately stoned out of my mind. And that was tough because one of my biggest concerns that night was if I passed out and ran the tank dry, would I wake up in time to get the system pressurized again? I figured the engine cutting out would probably wake me up, but I don't think I could have got the whole system pressurized fast enough to get the engine started before I hit the water. So that was a major concern. But it didn't matter that was a major concern, because I'm pretty sure I passed out 3 times that night anyway, because I'm not really sure, because I'm really pretty fuzzy on that night, but there was a lot of big gaps in my memory from that night. But I somehow made it and got down to Paris. But that's some of the stuff that happens when you're ferry flying. You get some of the most unique challenges in the world that you're not going to get anywhere else. Most places when you're flying, you've got airports to divert to. You got a problem with the weather or with the airplane, go someplace and land, figure it out, maybe fly the next day. In ferry flying, when you're out over the ocean or the jungle, you don't have that option. Had one of the most interesting flights over Africa. I was ferrying a 210, and I was the leg from Libreville, Gabon to my final destination in Dodoma, Tanzania. Gabon is on the west coast of Africa, right on the equator. And Tanzania, the town I was trying to hit, was 1,800 miles, basically straight east on the east coast of Africa. And I showed up at the airport that morning, and I got my weather briefing. And instead of a nice detailed weather briefing like you'd like for a trip of that distance, winds, the law forecast, en route, en route forecast, destination forecast. Instead of that, what I received was a 1-page mimeograph copy of a satellite picture of the continent of Africa. And that was it. No winds, the law forecast, no forecast at all. Basically, this infrared satellite picture that just showed massive thunderstorms about my destination. And that was it. The guy basically said, here you go. Have a nice flight. Awesome. Okay, well, why not? Let's go do that. And again, this is when I didn't have a GPS on this flight. And I knew there was going to be about a 6-hour window in the middle of this day, about a 12-hour flight day, that I was going to have no nav aids whatsoever. This is early 90s, and Central Africa literally didn't have any VORs or any NDBs in the whole of Central Africa. So I knew there was going to be about 6 hours where I was going to have nothing but dead reckoning. And to start off that flight, I had to fly over the Congo. And I met some local pilots the night before that said, if you fly over the Congo, don't check on with ATC, because they'll make you land, throw you in jail, hold you for ransom, and steal all your money and your radios. So their advice to me was turn off your transponder, fly at treetop level so they don't shoot you down, and just skirt across the Congo. So that was the first section of my trip. And then I got into the area where I was going to have 6 hours of no nav aids. No big deal. It's a scuddy day, 1,500-foot ceilings, 2 miles visibility, basically over Tarzan jungle with no way to check my progress. So it was just 6 hours of dead reckoning. Then I got to the point of the trip where I should be hitting the first VOR, tuned in the VOR, nothing. Half hour, 45 minutes go by. Like, okay, I must have missed it. Oh, well, there's another one coming in a couple hours. Sun went down. There's a mountain range I had to cross. On top of the mountain range was a line of thunderstorms. I had to go through the thunderstorms, got kicked around pretty bad. Got to the other side where I'd be picking up the VOR, and nothing. Missed the second VOR. Now I was starting to get a little bit concerned, because there I was at night over Central Africa, completely lost, and fuel's running out. Now my option was keep going in my original heading, or maybe try to take a left and head north and try to find Nairobi, which was 200 miles off my course, but maybe I could see that big city at night, the lights shining. But that seemed kind of iffy. I elected to continue on with the heading I was going on. And about an hour or so later, the NDB showed up. I got it on my ADF, and it turns out I was right on course. Cool. Came in and landed. Successful mission. It was a long day. I was scared the whole way, but I finally managed to find my destination and get the plane down. And that night, when I was talking to the local pilots, I was telling them my story. And when I told them about not picking up the VORs, they looked at each other and said, well, those VORs never work. The local warlords always steal the gas for the generators. And they never, as soon as we deliver it, somebody should have told you. I heartily agreed. I wish someone would have told me that. 12 hours earlier would have made a whole big difference in my evening. Would have made things a lot better, but oh well, all's well that ends well. But not all my trips have been nothing but hair-raising, death-defying adventures. I've also got to have some of the greatest adventures and experiences ferry flying that you literally can't get anywhere else. I mean, there's no other way to see the planet than by small plane, as you guys all know. And I've got to do some of the coolest stuff. I've got to buzz down the Amazon River first thing in the morning, twice, watching villagers in their little huts and their canoes. Got to buzz the African savanna, flying over elephants and giraffes and seeing thousands of flamingos come off the lake. I've got to fly up and down the coast of Greenland. The southern tip of Greenland is absolutely the most stunning place in the world to fly, because you can see the ice cap oozing down into the fjords, into hundreds of glaciers, which break off into millions of icebergs. And it's just absolutely stunning. As you can tell, I like to fly low when no one's watching. I think probably the funnest thing I ever got to do was I got to fly to Africa, or to Egypt, and I was delivering a Cherokee 6, a small single engine, 6-passenger plane. And I was delivering to Anwar Sadat's son. Anwar Sadat's the old president of Egypt. And I picked him up at Alexandria, which is on the northern coast on the Mediterranean. And together we flew to Cairo. And as we got to Cairo, he asked me, "Have you ever seen the pyramids?" I go, "Nope, never been to Egypt before. This is like a dream come true. It's on my bucket list." He goes, "Well, let's fly over there." And sure enough, there were the pyramids, and a life's goal was met. And then he asked me, "Do you want to buzz them?" Like, well, yeah, can we? Like, not at all, but I'm Anwar Sadat's son. I can do whatever I want. So handed me the controls, and I buzzed the crap out of the pyramids 3 times, right over the Sphinx, below the tops of the pyramids 3 times, both of us laughing like squirrel girls the whole time, just having a heck of a good time. After that, we pulled off. He says, "Okay, we better get out of here, because even I'm going to have some explaining to do over this one." And then we flew to his private airport. And as we set up on final, I looked and like, "Hey, well, there's a couple hundred kids playing soccer on the runway." He goes, "Don't worry, they'll move." I'm like, "Okay, sure." And sure enough, as we came in, the kids just parted like the Red Sea as we came in and landed, and they folded in right behind us. And just some of the damnedest things you get ferry flying. And I've just been truly blessed to have all these great adventures. And I think probably one of the biggest things that I love about ferry flying the most is the people I meet, and then the pilots. I try to avoid the big airports if I can. I love landing at the small airports, because what are at small airports? Bunch of degenerate pilots like you guys sitting on lawn chairs, grading landings and talking smart. And they're always just, no matter where in the world I go, pilots are the same, and they're always super friendly. They want to hear about all my adventures flying from the United States. Often they'll take me home, take me out to dinner, drinks, try to get me drunk, and try to get them to marry their daughter and take her back to the United States. That's happened twice. Just a lot of fun. The aviation community is a tribe, and you guys, as you know, pilots are the best worldwide. So I've had a heck of a lot of time, a lot of fun, and a lot of great adventures. Typically I would come home from a trip and I would tell my friends and family about what I'd done on that trip, and they were always nodding very politely and listening to my stories. But after a while, they said, "You know what you should do? You should write these down so we could ignore you from afar rather than right to your face." So I finally got around to doing that during the COVID lockdown last year, finished my book and published it. It's called Ferry Pilot, published it last July. And it's done great. I've been just totally shocked that people enjoy it. I mean, my mother always told me I was a good writer, but who can trust their mom? But it's been #1 on Amazon's bestseller list for the aviation biographies for 16 weeks. And I'm just really happy that that's gone well. And I love sharing these stories, but I love sharing the lessons that I learned along the way with pilots like you guys. The lesson of, if you've got time to panic, you've got time to do something more productive in an emergency situation. So that's the main lesson that I want to convey with the book and all these speeches. Always keep fighting, always keep swinging. Even if there isn't a way out, keep swinging as if there is, because you never know when you're going to get lucky and get out of that really crazy situation. So that's pretty much it. I'm still ferry flying, not as much as I used to. I'm trying to quit the ferry flying habit, but I've got this medical condition. It's called can't say no-itis. And people keep talking me into doing stupid stuff like flying small single engine airplanes over the Atlantic. But yeah, I'm really trying to cut it down because I really think I've used up my fair share of luck. You know, in my 30-year career, I've flown over 50 types of airplanes, landed in 60 countries, landed on every continent except Antarctica. And that is on my bucket list. I'll make that someday. And just had a heck of a good time. Nowadays, if I'm not flying small planes over the ocean, I'm jumping out of them. My main job is I run a skydiving school in Minneapolis, and I make about 600 or 700 skydives every summer. And then I fly some corporate. I typed in a Citation 650. So boring jet flying, which is kind of fun, but not really as exciting as flying a small plane over the Atlantic. So with that, if you guys got any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Hey, Kerry, this is Wim. We got a couple of questions in. First of all, when planes are sold as is and are to be ferried across the Atlantic, how thorough is your pre-flight check, and do you have a list that you always go to check out every plane before you get into it?
Well, the pre-flight that I personally do is as thorough as I can make it. I pretty much open every access panel that I can up, obviously take the cowl off. I cut apart the oil filter to make sure there's no metal in the oil. But there's only so much you can do. You know, I don't crack the case. I don't bore scope the cylinders. You know, there's not much I can do there. You know, they almost always have a fresh inspection. But I just look it over as thoroughly as I can and start flying. My first flight, I'll usually circle the airport and I'll look at my shadow to make sure I'm not leaving a trail of smoke. Hopefully my first couple of legs are over land with lots of airports, but that's not always the case. There's sometimes my first leg is out over the ocean. So just deal with what you find.
Okay, so what about the ferry fuel tanks? So you on both the back seats, you throw them in the bag in the luggage compartment, then you install metal fuel tanks in the back seats. What does that do with the weight and balance of the airplane and the performance of it?
Well, it affects it a lot. When we're using ferry tanks, we're allowed 25 to 30% over max gross. So the planes are super heavy. And back in the 90s, we were allowed 2 inches of aft CG, but they took that exemption away because too many pilots were getting killed. Because when you've got a plane that's 30% over max gross and 2 inches aft CG, it can be very unstable. And you really need to keep your speed up on takeoff and basically throughout the entire flight. If you get too slow and stall it, you won't recover. And that happened to a lot of guys, so they got rid of it. But you'd be amazed at how well these planes will haul that heavy load. I know a lot of pilots are concerned if they're 5 pounds over the max gross weight. And like, whatever. I've flown planes that are 30% over max gross, and it's just like not a big deal. They're really slow. You got to be really careful on takeoff. And but they'll haul it.
Yeah, I imagine there's a certain margin engineered into it, in that we just take advantage of, and we're not supposed to.
Yep. I'm not encouraging you to overload airplanes. Just saying, if you accidentally do, it'll still probably fly, but just be careful.
What if we were crazy enough to start on a career as a ferry pilot? How and where will we start?
Well, first of all, obviously you have to get experience just in regular flying. You know, get as many hours as you can. Got to have your commercial license, obviously, and then instrument multi-engine is best. It's tough to get started because most insurance companies won't cover you on an ocean leg unless you've already flown an ocean leg. So it's kind of that catch-22 chicken and the hen. How do you get experience without a job? And you can't get a job without experience. So almost every time you've got to find another ferry pilot to go with. So if you get hired in a ferry company, they'll send you with somebody and you sit with them for a couple of trips maybe until you've got enough experience to go on your own. When I started, we had I was lucky enough. They were a little easier, and my bosses had a good reputation with the insurance company that if he said a pilot was good to go, they kind of trusted him. Literally, I only my first trip that I have anybody with me, even in another plane. My very next trip, I was completely by myself in a 182 from the United States to Rome, Italy, and there was no one with me on the trip at all. They just sent me off. So sounds a little crazy and kind of is, but that's what we did back then. But these days, you pretty much have to get in with a ferry company and they'll take you under their wing.
What's the smallest airplane you ever flew across the Atlantic?
Smallest is kind of a toss up between a Cessna 182 and a Piper Arrow. I don't know which one you would consider smallest, but they're both pretty small. Biggest I ever flew was Beech 99. It's a twin turboprop, 19 passenger. And that was kind of a crazy one because I had no idea what a Beech 99 even was. I had almost no multi-engine turbine time. Never even seen that plane before, obviously. And they just flew me to Finland and say, here's a big turboprop, fly it to Canada. I'm like, okay. Took me a couple days to figure out how to fly the damn thing, but I made it.
If you fly dead reckoning on magnetic compass towards Greenland or Iceland, how do you compensate for the much larger deviation as you approach the North Pole?
Well, basically on your map, there's a there's a magnetic variation difference for each latitude, longitude position you're on, and you just account for that. It gets pretty tough when you're close to the magnetic pole, though. It swings quite a bit. There's a lot of it's just dead reckoning. And the other interesting thing is when we put the big metal ferry tanks and the HF radio in the plane, we have to adjust the magnetic compass on the instrument panel. We basically swing the compass because with all that metal and electronic gear in there, it makes the compass read wrong. So we always have to go to compass rows. And if you've ever taken apart your compass, it's got a couple of adjusting screws on there, and you'll have to kind of tune it in to make it read correctly. But a lot of it with that big variation up by the North Pole is a lot of it's just dead reckoning, and hope you find it. Hope you pick up that nav aid. With the advent of GPS, things got a lot easier.
Yeah, I imagine that made the ferry life a lot simpler. We've got a question here. Every time you get into a new airplane, a type of airplane they never flew before, do you need a little check ride with an instructor, or you're just good to go with your license?
I never got a check out from an instructor or basically anyone. Because the seller, he doesn't want to have anything to do with it. And so I basically will get in there, literally get the pilot's operating handbook out, look at any interesting emergency procedures, fuel management stuff, if it's got multiple fuel tanks, and then get it started. I look up the V speeds, make sure I know what the stall speed are, single engine, best glide speed, stuff like that. But it's usually just me figuring out how to fly the dang thing.
That's amazing. Every time we want to get into a new type of aircraft, we always need to take a check ride with an instructor to take us through basic maneuvers, stalls, get familiar.
Yeah. I've had to, when I've picked up airplanes in Africa and in Europe, sometimes you're supposed to have that checkout in your logbook. In the United States, if you're cleared for multi-engine planes, you're cleared for all multi-engine planes. And I know in a lot of countries, you need a checkout in a Cessna 310 and a Seneca and an Arrow and that actual thing. So there was a few times I had to get creative with my logbook to show that I'd been checked out by an instructor with that plane, which I did. I swear to God.
I remember reading something like that in your book about some facts that wasn't really facts.
Yeah.
We got a little follow-up question about the smallest plane. What's the biggest bird you flew across the Atlantic?
Yeah, I think it was that Beech 99 I mentioned. I did fly a Phenom 100 from Australia to the United States. That was a jet. That's not quite as big. I think the Beech 99 was definitely the biggest. That was 19 passenger. So Anything bigger, you need a type rating.
How do you deal with the HF radio requirement below 25,000 feet over South Greenland? Can you even fly?
We bring along an HF radio. We'll put a portable one in, wired into the ship's power, and then we run a copper wire, an antenna wire, from inside the plane. We run it out to the wing. We have an attachment point on the wingtip, and then back up to the tail, and that works pretty good. Either that, or we go further north. If you go up to northern Greenland, you don't need HF radio up from Iqaluit.
How many times do you have to cancel transatlantic flight? Out of every date that you set, trip that you plan, how many times is it a no-go?
You mean on the day? If I wanted to go a particular day and say no, I don't know, probably 30% of the time the weather's not good enough. A lot of times the winds aloft are not good enough. Ideally we would like to have a 3-hour reserve when we're crossing the Atlantic. And that's ideally, I think in 100 crossings, I've had 3-hour reserve on maybe 25 of them. So other than that, you need good winds aloft and decent weather. If you run into icing out there, that's what kills most pilots. It's not getting lost or run out of fuel. Usually they get iced up. They'll fly in bad conditions. So yeah, I'll probably have to reschedule 30% of the flights I'm planning on taking once I'm at the ocean.
That's a long lost time.
Yeah. Usually it's just a day, but I've sat in St. John's for 4 or 5 days one time, waiting for good weather. Just nothing you can do about it. The winds are the winds.
You obviously done a lot of air flying already, and I imagine you're kind of cherry picking the best flights at this time of your career. What's next? How do you see your next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years?
Well, you're right. I do cherry pick my ferry flights now. Pretty much now I only do it for fun. I love the adventure. There's no other way. There's no other type of flying in the world. There's no other way you can actually just go out and hang it out there. I mean, everything else in society is so safe and so bubble wrapped, and you're just, there's hardly any challenge left out there. So I still do the ferry flights that I like. If it's a really cool plane that I want to fly, or it's going to a really cool destination, then I'll go do it. Otherwise I don't bother. What I really want to do in the next 5 years or so is I want to fly to Antarctica. My personal plane is a Beech Queen Air. It's basically the piston version of a King Air. And I want to, the trip I've got planned is I'll go from the United States down through the Caribbean, which I love. Flying in the Caribbean is phenomenal. There's so many great islands, and they're all just amazing, and the weather's perfect. Caribbean is by far my favorite place to fly. Go through the Caribbean, then down the east coast of South America, touch down in Antarctica, and then I'm going to fly back up the west coast of South America through Central America and back up to the US. That's the trip I really want to do.
Just a couple more questions, and then we'll let you go.
Sure.
What's the longest nonstop leg you ever flew?
14 and a half hours. That was Agadir, Morocco to the Ivory Coast, and a real slow airplane with bad winds. So that was a really long day.
How many Ziplocs did that take?
That was probably 4 or 5. Because I drink a lot. Once you learn how to do that, there's no sense in dehydrating yourself. And
so that's 10 because you double bag them. Huh?
Got a double bag and carry a lot of them.
Okay, well, last question for today. Your favorite all-time airplane?
Oh boy, that's tough because there's so many different categories. So I think the most fun one to fly is the de Havilland Beaver. Just a big old radial engine beast that belches smoke and backfires. And I used to fly skydivers in one. I've just had a blast. It was like the Harley of airplanes. Favorite ferry flying plane is I got to fly a Piper Aerostar, fastest piston twin ever built. And that thing was a rocket ship. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that.
We have a member in our club that did a couple of 100 hours on beaver and floats in Alaska
Oh, fun. Yeah.
many years ago.
Yeah. I only flew on the Beaver on wheels, but that was a lot of fun. I mean, you can get that thing flying so slow. It's crazy. It's a good time. But the one we flew was pretty beat up, pretty rough looking, which I loved. Like it's just, I love just beat up old planes, and I love the challenge of it.
I think all skydiving planes are beat up.
Not our caravan. We use a caravan for our skydiving operation. It's pretty nice. Well, it's mostly nice. It's a little beat up inside. Skydivers are not careful inside airplanes. They break stuff a lot.
Are you still up for a couple of questions? Because
Sure, I got time.
Perfect. What's your favorite mid-Atlantic fuel stop and why?
Mid-Atlantic? Well, there's only really, I've never been to Bermuda. We don't go up through there. Really, the mid-Atlantic one is in the Azores, and that's kind of nice. But I really like Greenland. Greenland is cool. The southern tip of Greenland is just beautiful. And Narsarsuaq has got a great restaurant, great little bar, a lot of fun hanging out there. It's real pretty. It's one of the exotic places in the world. It's one thing I like about flying and, ferry flying. I love going to places that aren't your norm. That's why I like Africa so much, and the Caribbean and South America. But Narsarsuaq, Greenland is, when you land there, you realize you're not in Kansas anymore. You're out doing it.
Real flying.
Yep.
Do you have an Eleanor plane, the aircraft that you never got to ferry, but you really want to ferry that airplane across the Atlantic?
Oh, love to ferry a DC3 across the Atlantic. That would be cool. Like the old guys did in World War II. It's just some big old radial engine planes, and with nothing. I'd love to learn how to use a sextant like those guys did. You go up in the bubble and shoot star shots and do it like the old guys did. Because it's kind of weird. Charles Lindbergh did it with just a compass, and then they got sophisticated and they started using sextants. And then they got away from sextants and they had internal navigation systems. But then when I came along, we didn't have any of that stuff. So I basically went back in time and did it harder like Charles Lindbergh with just a compass. And I'm probably one of the other guy in our company, we're still flying back then. We're probably one of the last people to fly the North Atlantic with just a compass, because when everyone else was transitioning over to GPS, my boss was still a little cheap. And so we were still using nothing but compasses while the guys had GPSs. So I might be the last one who ever did it on purpose, or unless you just turn it off, I suppose.
What about the Discovery show? Will there ever be another season?
I kind of doubt it. They did the 2 seasons and it was really popular. They're still showing it in the United States and around the world. But we had a cameraman get killed in Africa, and that kind of scared the Discovery Channel, which is really a shame because people really like it. And, I still get mobbed by fan all the time. Singular one. Literally tens of people around the world know who I am. But I'd love to do it again. It was a lot of fun. Taught you a lot of patience. It's actually kind of scary too, because having all the cameras in the cockpit filming everything 24 hours a day for a whole ferry trip, you do realize that anything you do wrong, everybody's going to see. They're going to see every stupid mistake you make. So better hope you're good.
And remember it forever.
Yes. And bring it up.
Have you ever been approached by people asking you to take some illegal cargo with you?
No, not really. I mean, my boss, we did smuggle airplane parts back in the 90s, no drugs though, but it would be super easy. But we had a lot of parts in the plane that we didn't actually go through customs with it. So there's a little bit of that going on, but nothing bad. But literally, it would be so easy to smuggle drugs around as a ferry pilot, because when you go in there, customs never looks in the plane. They're going, really? You're flying that from the United States? They just want to ask a bunch of questions. And I think I've only had the plane inspected once in Brazil, and they were training some guys.
Yeah, I know those guys in Brazil. They even check the expiration date on your fire extinguisher just to
Yeah. Better have your stuff together when you go to Brazil, that's for sure.
Have you ever had any problems with like health checks? The countries you need your shots for, you need special clearance.
Well, kind of a thing. When I started with the company, you're supposed, if you're going to Africa, you got to have a whole bunch of shots. You're supposed to have this. And my boss was too cheap to actually do the shots. So he had gotten a hold of blank immunization cards, and he would just write in that you had shots made. And he took a US 50-cent piece and made a stamp out of it, made it look official. So I had a fake immunization card. So I was flying around Africa with no shots at all, but it said I had yellow fever, malaria, and all this other stuff. So I probably really should have got the shots, but I never did.
Oh, I guess you were never there long enough to get.
You never know. Yeah, I went back in the 90s. It was kind of the tail end of the cowboy period, 70s and 80s and 90s. Ferry flying was pretty cowboy. Everybody just did whatever you could to get away with stuff, and that's how you moved airplanes, fast and loose.
Given a choice, would you prefer a long legged flight or many flights a day?
I like one long flight. That's why I love flying with ferry tanks. You don't have to stop every 2-3 hours and get fuel. I love a nice long, just get up and go, not waste time landing and taxiing and getting fuel and stuff like that. That's my preference. Butt gets sore though.
Well, you can get a sheepskin under your butt for that. Ferry flight or skydive?
Oh boy, I have to say ferry flight, because I just skydive so much more. I get to skydive a lot, and I don't get to do too many ferry flights. I haven't made a ferry flight in a year because of COVID, and I really miss it now. I'm kind of looking for a new one. Got one maybe coming up.
Yeah, everything slowed down because of the COVID. They actually shut the recreational airspace down here for a couple of months last year.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's even if you go someplace, everything's shut down, so it's not any fun anymore. So at least we're still skydiving.
I think we pretty much wrapped up all the questions. Everybody's very excited to hear about your next adventures. I think you're going to gain a lot of new followers on Facebook now.
Cool. Yeah, I've got a couple more books coming out. Got a novel that's done in the editing process, and I've got at least 2 more books on ferry flying stories, because I got a million of them, and I've got some other guys they're telling their stories too. So that'll be exciting. So stay tuned for that. They're all on Amazon. And if anybody wants any signed copies, just go to my website, kerrymccauley.com, and I can send you one out. Now, shipping to Europe is kind of expensive. It's usually around $25, but if you get a couple guys together and I can send 3 books in one box, it saves a lot. But either way.
Well, it's worth the money here. We get a signed autographed by you.
Yep.
That's what we did. I think we can almost wrap it up, unless there's another question from somebody. So I would like to thank you very much for your time. I think Mathieu would still like to say a couple of words and thank you for your time. So I imagine he'll log in right now.
Yes, that's correct. I would like to thank you very much for the time you spent here online with us. And I also would like to say that people can find the link to your website and to your books below the video. And we'll try also to make it available afterwards as a recording so they can watch it later on if they wish. So I would like to thank you again for the very interesting presentation and to answer the questions for all the viewers. So hopefully maybe we see you next time, and maybe when you ferry across Belgium, you can stop by at the North Sea Vlieg Club. You're always welcome in Ostend.
I'll make a point of it.
Hey, Kerry, if you ever ferry a DC3, you let me know, and I'll be right there on the right seat with you.
Okay, it's
I'll
a date.
fly in from wherever, whenever, whichever date. I'll make sure that I'm there. And I'll just stay quiet in my seat. Whatever you
All
want
right.
to do.
If I can swing it, I'll let you know. I sure hope I do. That'd be cool.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.